I wonder when it was in the history of Christianity that the ordained ministers of the church began to be classified as a clergy and distinguished from the laity among their fellow believers. Well, this distinction was clear in the Jewish religion, and it seems to be one of the things that Jesus himself criticized very often. And today's gospel is an example of the biting words that Jesus said about the clerics of his time. People often forget that Jesus himself was not a cleric but a lay person in Jewish society. He knew that in the secular world, there was a great tendency for people in authority to lord it over and to make their importance felt, magpa-importante. He said this in reaction to James and John, when once they expressed to Jesus their desire for positions of authority within their group. And what did Jesus say to them in reply? Sabi niya, hindi ganyan sa atin, ha? It shall not be so among you. I think Jesus is actually exaggerating when he says, call no one on earth Father. Because I am sure he called Saint Joseph Father. And the early Christians called each other brothers and sisters. And they seem to have addressed their pastors as Father. Ako, honestly, parang nanliliit ako. I squirm when I am addressed in church by the title, Your Excellency. In other countries, archbishops are still addressed as Your Grace or even Your Lordship. Diyos ko, Your Lordship. I would still understand it when it is secular authorities like mayors and governors and ambassadors who address us by such titles. Because sanay naman sila to follow civil protocols. Besides, that is how they themselves wish to be addressed anyway. But Jesus sternly reminded his disciples, hindi ganyan sa atin. It shall not be so among you. Minsan sa isang diaconal ordination homily, I told the candidates that the elegant dalmatic vestments that they were going to be vested with was basically a glorified apron. Yun lang. No different from that of a waiter in a restaurant. At itong istola na sinusuot naming mga bishops and priests, well, this thing that we put on our shoulders draws its inspiration from the yoke, sa Tagalog, pamatok. You know, yung nilalagay sa batok ng kalabaw para mag-araro. What you put on the backs of oxen and carabaos when you make them pull a cart or a plow. And all of that seems to be forgotten when the symbols turn into liturgical paraphernalia that get associated with hierarchical office. Hindi alam ng maraming Katoliko na yung Monsignor, hindi naman ministerial role yon, but a title. At ang literal meaning ay, My Lord, Panginoon ko. Actually, tatlo lang naman ang ordained ministries in the church. The deacon, meaning the servant. The presbyter, meaning the elder. And the bishop, meaning overseer or coordinator. And they have been wrongly understood as gradations or degrees of dignity in the hierarchical office. Ano bang maging diakono? Maging chimoy, to be a servant. And it is not a mere stepping stone to becoming a priest. Just as becoming a priest is not a mere stepping stone to becoming a bishop. Hindi ganon. The diaconate is the very foundation. It is the very core of all ordained ministries. When we bishops or presbyters stop doing our jobs in the spirit of servanthood or diaconia, and we begin to lord it over, it is then that our office begins to lose its foundation. And that is when it gets reduced to a clerical status, the claim to a sacred power, kumbaga, of a special elite in the church, seems to be the very root cause of what Pope Francis calls the disease of clericalism. And it is also what reinforces all kinds of authority abuse in the church. Saan ba galing yung power? All power in the church is from the Holy Spirit. It is a gift bestowed by the Holy Spirit for the ministry or service. Doon sa Book of Sirach, chapter 3, verse 18, merong isang magandang paalala to people who are in a position of authority. Sabi niya, the higher you get, the humbler you should be. Then the Lord will be pleased with you. It took one pope, like Pope John the 23rd, to realize how ridiculous it was na kailangang buhatin sa isang trono ang Santo Papa. Yung tronong binubuhat was called sedia gestatoria. And it took one pope, called Pope Francis, to feel the awkwardness of living in that part of the Vatican that was casually called Papal Palace, palasyo ng Santo Papa. Kaya, iniwan tuloy niya, and he chose to live in Casa Santa Marta. Pero up to now, many residences of bishops are still being called bishops' palaces in many countries. And that is scandalous. Pag tinataas natin ang sarili natin, when we extol our own greatness and separate ourselves from the rest of humanity, that is when we can expect to be humbled or sometimes even humiliated. And that happens especially when our human weaknesses get the better of us. Merong kasabihan, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And I beg to disagree. I would rather say, to err is human, and to forgive is also human. Para bang napakababa naman ang tingin natin sa pagkatao natin kapag iuugnay lang natin sa pagkakamali. Thanks to Jesus, our new model of humanity, we can ascribe to our humanity even what is sublime and noble. After all, human though we are, we bear the image and likeness of divinity in ourselves. Totoo, we are creatures of paradox. Sometimes we can be the best of ourselves. At other times, we can be the worst of ourselves. Oo, we are weak and sinful, but we are also loved unconditionally and redeemed by Christ. Christ, the God, who became human so that humans can become truly divine.